Hi, everybody, and welcome back to The Last Honest Realtor. I am your host, David Fleming. Thank you for watching or for listening, because today we are going to, or at least try, to answer a question that I've had on my mind for a long time. Why do people love being bearish on Toronto real estate? I kind of wanted to call this one, Why Do People Hate Toronto Real Estate? But it sounds very negative. And I guess the whole bearish attitude is probably more accurate. People don't hate Toronto real estate. I think people are bearish on it. And maybe some of that stems from the hate, which of course stems from other emotions, which we'll probably get into at the very end once I've made my point. So I'll say this. Toronto real estate is always a hot topic. It always has been. There are people that think the market's going to go up. There are people that think the market's going to go down. But how many times have you heard the word crash associated with Toronto real estate? I got into the business in 2004, and I'd say between 04 and 08, I heard the word crash collectively more in those 4 years than from 08 to current, which is 16 years. When I got into the business, everyone was talking about this crash. Now, recently, I would say the word is correction, or decline, or adjustment. But it's kind of funny because the market has gone up so much since people first started talking about the crash that they don't really talk about it anymore. But I wouldn't say across the board, there are still people that believe in the crash. So why are people so obsessed with a real estate crash? Is it because they want it to happen? Are there people out there that think, if only the market crashed, I could afford that house in Rosedale? Believe it or not, I'm going to show you one such house shortly. But I want to start when I began in real estate in 2004. My first experience with this notion of the coming crash. The crash is coming, right? It's going to happen. 2004, I got into real estate. And a friend of mine, who I grew up with and lived in the area that I lived in, had said to me, you should consider selling your house. And I said, why? And he said, and I quote, because a year from now, you could buy it back for half as much. It's a pretty bold prediction. Now, I won't get too much into the personality of my childhood friend. I would say that my childhood friend, those people that, or those kids, I should say, when, they're 7 and they're pathological liars, it's kind of cute. Like the 7-year-old in your daughter's class says something like, I have 100 horses at my house. And you're like, oh, that's kind of cute. When you get into early 20s, it's not so cute anymore. And it'd be the kind of thing where, you'd be having beers with the boys, and then a friend of mine would say something like, yeah, I made $400,000 today on a land deal. And everyone would kind of turn. Be like, yeah, no, with my dad, I bought some land and I sold some land. And you never really knew what happened. But when he told me in 2004, you should sell your home and buy it back next year for half, and I said, I don't understand. He said, well, my dad said the market's about to crash. Now, his dad was not the man that he told us he was. My friend also said when he turns 21, he gets a $12 million trust fund. And trust me, that didn't happen, but lost touch with him probably 15, 18 years ago. The point is that, look, this man thought, the father, the market was going to crash and told his son, you could buy properties back for half as much. That was a very successful, very well respected in his industry business person. And again, I'm paraphrasing because it's hearsay, because his son, the pathological liar, told me. But that was my first experience with this idea of a crash, is that somebody had told their son, the market's going to crash. You can buy properties back for half next year. And then he turned around and told me that we should sell our house and buy it back for half. Now, that was in 2004. So I got into the business in 04. I started the blog in 07. And all I ever heard about was the crash. All the time, the crash is coming, the crash is coming. People were talking about how the market was going to drop 30% crash, 40% crash. Now, I'll tell you this. Since 2004, when I got into the business, the average home price in Toronto is up 257%. The average home price in 2004 was $315,000. The average home price last year was $1,126,000. A lot of time has passed. But this idea of the crash, this is all I ever heard. And I started my blog in 07, and then we got the word bubble. Bubble. It was everywhere. Crash and bubble. And in 2008, something happened that was a major moment in the real estate market, not just present, but as it would play out in the future. It was a gentleman by the name of Garth Turner, which many of you know. Garth Turner wrote a book called The Greater Fool, The Troubled Future of Real Estate. Now, Garth Turner had a blog. He still does. Credit to Garth Turner. He's been writing his blog for as long as I have, maybe even longer. And Garth Turner was a gentleman that would every single day talk about the coming market crash. And Garth Turner wrote a book about the coming market crash. And I want to read to you now some of the comments on Garth Turner's book on Amazon. Okay? Now, in 2008, the average home price was $379,000. The average home price has increased 197% since then. Here is a comment. I watched my parents fall into a very similar trap in the 1980s. They paid dearly for over 10 years. If you know any young people thinking of mortgaging themselves down to their underwear to buy a starter mansion, do them a huge favor and give them this book. At least you'll be able to say, I told you so. Someone wrote that. Garth Turner wrote this book, and so many people not just bought it and read it and absorbed it, but started to believe it. And in 2008, people started to sit on the sidelines and wait for the crash. And it never happened. But people would double down and triple down. And it's funny, but actually not funny. Here's a comment posted in 2019, 11 years after Garth Turner wrote this book called The Greater Fool, The Troubled Future of Real Estate. You ready for this? He has been saying for many years that the Canadian housing market was going to crash, and I am still waiting. I put off buying a house years ago because of what he is saying, so I'm kind of disappointed that he steered me wrong. I still think it is going to crash eventually, but I think it will be a much softer landing. Now, the average home price in 2009 was $395,000. In 2019, it was $819,000. This person lost out on a lifetime of tax-free capital gains that he or she will never get back. And it may be in part or in full because of this book. And if you go to Amazon, you can read all of the comments on here. And they're fascinating to me because it just shows you, like 2016, great book. And I truly believe he's right, but his timing was off. So this is someone saying, yes, the market has continued to go up, but I still think the crash is coming. Here's someone in 2008, right after the book came out. This is a must-have if you are either about to invest in real estate or if you have been led to believe that us good Canadians won't go through what happened in the US real estate market. Huh. Okay. Another comment. Give yourself a deeper perspective before to sign that mortgage and buy this book. Maybe you will still go ahead, but you won't be as easy to fleece as you might have been before reading this book. We're talking about buying a home in Toronto when the average home price was $379,000. When today it's $1,126,000, and people are talking about being fleeced. Being fleeced. What was it about the Toronto real estate market in 2008 that made people think it was due for a crash? Not an adjustment or a correction, but a crash. And I don't know how one would define a crash. I think it would have to do with the amount of decline, but also the amount of time. Now, if the average home price dropped 30% in 4 months, I would call that a crash. But how long does it last for? Because during the pandemic, and I almost know these numbers off by heart, during the pandemic, January and February of 2020, we were on an upswing and we were approaching $900,000 plus. I think it was $902,000 was the February price. Now I know these numbers because the peak reached in April of 2017 was around $920,000, $930,000. The average home price dropped to $863,000 and then down to $7 something. Now that was a crash, statistically speaking. But by June, the average home price in Toronto was $930,000. It wasn't a crash. It was a worldwide pandemic. And we all know what happened after that. which is that the market started to absolutely skyrocket. Now, if you're a bear, you're a cynic, you're going to say, well, that was because of rock bottom mortgage rates. In part, it was also because of all the people during the pandemic that realized what they wanted to do with their lives. I had somebody that was in a condo and said that his partner began to get agoraphobia, essentially. We need to get out of this condo. They bought a house, beautiful backyard and everything like that. I think COVID shook a lot of people. But that was one person. I had another group of people that said, we realized that we just don't want to be in the city. We want to be outdoors. They ended up selling in Toronto after living here their entire lives and moving up north. I had folks that said, I'm going to be working from home from now on. I don't need to be here. Some folks said, I want to sell my condo, get a house. Others said, I want a house, or I have a house, I need to get a condo. And that was part of the reason for the boom. It wasn't just interest rates. And that's the argument that people want to make. And I would say that with the average home price in 2020 being $929,000, moving to $1,095,000, 2021, $1,190,000, almost 1.2 in 2022. And yes, last year it went down, as we know, didn't crash, right? There was an adjustment. It was down 5% from 2022 to 2023, 5%. Now that's, of course, after going up 40%, 5% after 40. I have this analogy. If you were to say the Toronto Maple Leafs are going to win the Stanley Cup, and let's say you started saying it in 1968, and as we all know, they haven't won since 67. If you said it every single year until they finally did, would you be able to turn around and say, see, I was right? It's very childish. But if somebody is going to talk about the crash is coming, the crash is coming, the crash is coming, if the market dropped 15% after it went up 300, could you say that you were right? And so going back to the Garth Turner issue, I call it issue, the Garth Turner issue. In 08, in 09, 010, there were so many people that latched onto this and people just dug in deeper. Now, in 2008, Garth Turner had a little tete-a-tete with John Passalis from Realosophy. I actually had a tete-a-tete with Garth Turner. Now that I think of it, I could have put that into the podcast. I think I wrote something called A Day in the Park with Me and My Boy Garth, and then I photoshopped our faces onto two bodies of people walking in a park. He referenced me in his blog or something like that. He called me like a little blogger. Anyway, so he had this tete-a-tete with John Passalis, and all of his minions went to work. Here's a comment, okay? This is someone saying, attention, John Passalis, who to me is one of the most well-respected people in the real estate industry. I hope that you are your coworkers. He's meant to say and, but he probably can't spell. I hope that you or are your coworkers at Realosophy, very catchy name, by the way, great imagination, are not adversely affected by this bear talk. You seem like a bunch of smart young folk. And I'd hate to see any of you get squashed in the coming Garth-induced real estate crater that is coming. All of these Garth Turner fans were so passionate about the crash. This person said the real estate crater that is coming. Now, again, this was 08. The market went up in 09, up in 10, up in 11, up in 12, up in 13, up in 14, up in 15, up in 16, up in 17. And then it went down 2% in 2019. Maybe that's what he was talking about. So I think I've done enough on Garth here. I think I could speak a lot to it. One of the other things I'll say is that if you were looking for advice on real estate and someone told you not to put your money in real estate and they happen to be running financial services, would you think that maybe there's a conflict of interest there, or maybe that in part has to do with why they are telling you not to buy real estate? Because that may in part or in whole been true of Mr. Turner, and may or in part or in whole be true of Hilliard MacBeth, who wrote a similar book years later. But before we get to that, I want to talk about Toronto Life. Toronto Life, the publisher or president or somebody, when I was involved with a seminar there a few years ago, said to me, Toronto Life, we write about two things, food and real estate. And that's probably, 70% of what they do. But I occasionally keep copies of magazines, and I'm going to hold this up for those looking on YouTube. And for those listening, I will say the front cover of this, in 2010, it says, "We're in a bubble. Now what?" Front cover, right? And they've got this massive, detached, 4-bed, 5-bath Edwardian. It says in huge print, 1.05 million, 151,000 over asking. We're in a bubble. Now what? So we've got Garth Turner in '08. In 2010, we've got this Toronto Life. We're in a bubble. Now what? The average price in Toronto is up 161% since this issue of Toronto Life. We're in a bubble. Now what? A hysteria-free guide. When will it pop? How bad will it be? Guys, I'm not making this up. This is in print. When will it pop? How bad will it be? And if I can please for a minute go back to the beginning and ask, why are people so happy to be bearish on Toronto real estate? What is this obsession with saying the market's going to crash? Why do people want this market to crash? Is it because they want to afford stuff? Is it because they dream of perhaps owning something that they could never otherwise own? Is it because the people that read Garth Turner's blog are the proverbial basement dwellers? Are they looking at their lives and saying what could have been? Are they looking at their lives and saying, I can't believe what other people have? This is a common theme with a lot of my thoughts on society and politics today. But I don't understand, and maybe this is a bad ending, right? 10, 15, 20 minutes from now. I don't understand this obsession with bearishness in the market, especially in the face of all of these statistics. So in 2010, we get this Toronto Life cover. We're in a bubble. Now what? When will it pop? How bad will it be? Let me break here for a second because I'm going to print off 2 listings and I'm going to show you how bad it was. No, not for the sellers, for people that listen to this nonsense. Hey guys, we just launched this week's Pick 5. It is called Much Ado About a View, and it's about views from downtown condos. We looked at 5 different types, including the lake view, the park view, the city view, and a couple of others, asking whether or not this view constitutes a massive premium in price. Now, if you're not already signed up to Pick 5, please go to Toronto Realty blog, check it out. I think you'll enjoy it. You can sign up, and every Thursday when we release an episode, you will get an email describing what the video is and with a helpful link. Folks, trust me, if you like listening to the podcast, you're going to love watching Pick 5. Okay, welcome back. I wanted to go and pull these listings from my office, which I printed earlier. Now, there's an intersection of 2 ideas here. One is 2010 Toronto Life sends out an issue about real estate and says, we're in a bubble, now what? When will it pop? How bad will it be? And the second was an interview by a lady named Nicole Foss, one of these economic, personal finance gurus like Garth Turner or Hilliard, MacBeth, who made a very, very bold prediction, one that I simply cannot do justice without you hearing it or viewing it. So let's play that audio and video right now.
Okay, so by, let's say, peak to trough, Canadian real estate, top to bottom, what's your prognosis there? How much of a collapse are you talking about?
Well, I imagine real estate falling, and people will think this is extreme, by about 90% on average.
90%?
Yes, 90%, the way you get to a 90% fall in real estate prices is, imagine a credit collapse, which is where we're going. We're moving to a deflationary credit collapse. So your pool of buyers ends up being the people who can buy a property for cash, do not need to borrow money to do this, and who choose to use incredibly scarce cash for that purpose at that time. That pool of buyers will be extremely small. And so you can get enormous price collapses when you simply undercut price support at anything remotely like.
Wow, 90%. 90%. Ms. Foss believes that Canadian real estate could drop in price by upwards of 90%. Now, I've pulled a listing in Rosedale, okay? This is 57 Highland Avenue. Beautiful red brick Georgian Tudor, sold for $3 million in 2010. Ms. Foss contends that this property could drop in value from $3 million to $300,000. Now, worst case scenario, you could say she's talking about Canadian real estate. That's an average, not Toronto, not Rosedale, not luxury. But let's just take that for what it is. Ms. Foss believes that Canadian real estate could drop 90% in value. Do you ever foresee a day where a $3 million property drops to $300,000? Now, in this price point, in this area, in this market, there is a floor. There is a floor at which people, whether they're users or investors, would go and buy. And I use this adage. If you're walking down the street and you see a penny, would you pick it up? Maybe not. Would you pick up a nickel? Maybe not. Would you pick up a dime? And so on. Everyone's got a price at which they would bend over and pick that coin up. And I believe that in the real estate market, there is a price at which, whether you're an investor, whether you're a real estate investment trust, whether you're a user, you would see something and say, I can't not buy that. Now, let's say this $3 million house in Highland dropped from $3 million to 2.9 or 2.8 or 2.7 or 2.6 or 2.5 or 2.4. At what point would the market say this is too good to be true? It's not 90%, right? It's not 80, not 70, it's not 50, it's not 60. It's absolutely insane for that person to make that prediction. And I wrote about it on my blog. Now, the interesting part about this house, 57 Highland Avenue, sold for $3 million in 2010. It sold for $7.4 million in 2016. Now, it had been spruced up, I won't lie, but it's the same property. So 6 years after we got a prediction about the real estate market dropping 90% in value, this house resold for more than double. And again, after a renovation, right, was one example that I found. So to me, that was one of the more insane predictions I'd ever seen. And there are so many insane predictions. And as I said, I have been kind of keeping a mental log of all of this bearishness since my first experience with it, which was a friend of mine saying, you should sell your house and buy it back next year for half as much. But how could anyone suggest in 2010 that the market was going to drop upwards of 90%? That was crazy. So in 2015, we get a book written by a gentleman named Hilliard MacBeth. Mr. MacBeth wrote a book called When the Bubble Bursts. That's right. When the Bubble Bursts, Surviving the Canadian Real Estate Crash. So you have both words in there, crash and bubble. It's almost as though this gentleman must have been reading my blog the previous years. No, not actually. But as I said at the onset, what we started with this word crash turned into this obsession with the word bubble. And they started to go hand in hand. We're going to come back to bubble in a minute when we talk about our good friends at UBS. So Mr. MacBeth writes this book in 2015. Now, Mr. MacBeth, of course, does what for a living? Anyone know? Mr. MacBeth is a portfolio manager. Yeah. Mr. MacBeth sells investments. So if you had money and you could put it into, I don't know, real estate, you could also put money into stocks and bonds, maybe with Mr. MacBeth, right? So just like Mr. Turner, Mr. MacBeth, I would say both of them, and I'm not alleging anything. I'm just saying that you have to take that with a grain of salt if you wanted to, right? That maybe, just maybe, a lot of the people saying that real estate is going to crash have a vested interest in people not buying real estate because, you know, every once in a while, I have a client that tells me, my financial advisor told me it's not a good time. Or somebody says, well, you know, I need the deposit for the house I'm going to buy, but my financial advisor tells me I shouldn't take it out right away. You know, like, look, financial advisors are running portfolios. They need your money. That's a reality of it. And if you want to buy a house, you need to use some of that money. So when we look at predictions like this and when we read books like this, we have to say, well, who wrote them? So again, I want to go to Amazon because I want to read some of these comments. They're fascinating, right? It's just wild. And you can see the dates on these things. So it was 2015 when he wrote the book, right? This person says, reading financial commentators like Garth Turner for years, the concept of a real estate crash here in Canada is something I believe will happen. Now, this is 7 years after Garth Turner wrote his book. Average home price in 08, $379. Average home price in 2015, $622. So some quick math there, 230 out of, what is that, 60, 70%? The average home price has gone up 70%. And this person, after reading Garth Turner's book, says, the real estate crash here in Canada is something I believe will happen. Let's just say you're an average person. Okay, you're not a Rhodes Scholar, but you know, you're not living on the street either. If you read a book in 08 that said that the real estate market was going to crash, then it went up 70%. Then you read another book saying it was going to crash. How could you say this is something I believe will happen? Then he adds, MacBeth takes a more pessimistic stance on what will unfold when the crash happens, right? We're all going to be lining up for food and water. We're going to be cooking dogs in the street. What is this? What is this? Where does this come from? Since 2004, I've been trying to answer that question. Where does all this come from? Home prices went up every year from '08 to 15. And here's a commenter after reading Garth, now reading MacBeth, saying that it's going to happen, and even adding that MacBeth talks about what will happen when the crash unfolds. And then he says, I sincerely hope a few Canadian real estate optimists will read this and entertain what I think is a more realistic viewpoint. So apologies for being optimistic on the market, which, by the way, has doubled since he wrote this book. He says that real estate optimists should read this and entertain what he thinks is a more realistic point of view. He believes it's more realistic that there will be a crash, and since then prices have doubled. And he's basing his realistic view of prices crashing on a 70% increase since the previous book he read. Guys, it just doesn't make any sense. And I could continue to go on and another person says, great overview of the current state of the housing market in Canada's major centers. Okay, all right. And, I think this is a great book. It's hard for me to give a completely unbiased view of his arguments, as I bought the book already convinced that a real estate bubble is about to burst. This person's blaming themselves for being pessimistic and believing in a bubble because they were already convinced there was a bubble. Where is this coming from? And you might ask, David, why were you bullish on the real estate market from '04 onward? It was so cheap to begin with? Toronto's a world-class city. Toronto's effectively the capital of Canada. If you look at a New York or you look at a London, I know we're not the same, but to say in 2004 the average home price was $315,000, that's insane. When I got into the business, you could go and buy a brand new detached 4-bed, 4-bath in Leaside for 700,000 Canadian. That's insane, right? That same house today is 2.8, right? And maybe that's too much. I don't know. But the point is, Toronto was undervalued for so long, and there's not enough real estate. My next point I'll try to sum up without going off on a political tangent. Toronto is not a well-planned city. It never has been. And you look at things today, like our roads, like our highways, like our transit, right? Politicians, city councilors, they don't have a long-term plan, right? Someone said to me yesterday, Toronto's turning into Gotham City. It was kind of funny. Another person said, it's like RoboCop downtown. But point is, not really putting a great face on Toronto right now. Point is, Toronto was not exceptionally well planned. And in terms of housing, look, Toronto started as this cute little town. And in terms of housing, there are not enough houses. And the condo boom that's happened since I got into the business, yeah, okay, those have been absorbed by owners, by renters, whether they're owner-occupied or whether it's an evil foreign buyer that purchased them all. There's still not enough housing in the city of Toronto as the population continues to expand and Canada's population continues to expand. So yes, I have been bullish on Toronto real estate since I got into the business. It has nothing to do with me being biased. In fairness, I blame Garth Turner and Hilliard MacBeth for their bearishness because they work in financial services. If you want to blame me for working in real estate for my bullishness, that is totally fine. So I want to fast forward here to 2017. And in 2017, we get, I believe, our first edition of what's called the UBS Bubble Index. Now, do you know what that is? I'm going to Google this right now. UBS Bubble Index. Oh, it auto-completes Toronto Realty blog. That's cute. Maybe those are my cookies, but it shows you how much I've written about this extensively. So the UBS Global Real Estate Bubble Index. This is the 2023 version. Find out which cities' property prices and valuations have fallen the most, where further corrections are imminent, and where price increases are continuing or could happen in the future. So in 2017, UBS puts out their first bubble index, or the first one at least that maybe I was paying attention to. And they rank Toronto number one. Number one, they've ranked Toronto. And in 2018, Toronto was third. And in 2019, Toronto was second. And in 2020, Toronto was third. And in 2021, Toronto was second. Now, I only have that 5 years worth of data, but I think you get the point, and I deliberately didn't go further back because why do we need to? The point is that the UBS Bubble Index, and these are smart people. They're smarter than you. They're smarter than me. They have sat down and they have looked at a pile of data that has led them to the conclusion that Toronto is in a bubble. and that it's going to pop. Now, Toronto Life 2010, front cover, we're in a bubble. Now what? How bad will it pop? How bad will it be? And then we get UBS, we're in a bubble. Now, the average home price since 2017 has increased 37%. Okay. Were they wrong about this bubble? Yes. But what were the indicators that they were using? What are the indicators that a lot of people use that maybe I would argue against today? Give me a couple of seconds, guys. We'll come right back to that. Hey folks, coming up next week on Toronto Realty Blog, Monday the 17th of June, I have written a post about, are you ready for this? A pre-construction condo being launched by Lamb Developments Corp. in Streetsville, Mississauga. Yeah, interesting place to do it. When you Google map it, you can see it's kind of a nothing corner at a major intersection, but the prices are wild. Up to $1,350 per square foot for studio condos. I'm going to write about this, take a deep dive into the numbers, and then compare and contrast those pre-construction prices with what else is available on the resale market in Mississauga, but also what you could get in the downtown core of Toronto. Because honestly, folks, as I write in the blog, $900,000 for a 700 square foot 1+ den with no parking and no locker in Streetsville, Mississauga, just didn't pass the smell test to me, as you'll see with your own two eyes next week on the blog. Okay, so we were just talking about why. Why is it that a global financial services company like UBS would put out a bubble index, and why would they continually rank Toronto on that list? Now, at the break, I did look back and see that in 2015, Toronto was not on the list, okay? I started with you saying 2017, they were number one. Now, they went from number 1 to 3 to 2 to 3 to 2, and then in 2022, they were ranked number 1 again. All this time, prices continued to rise. So the question is why? Now, I'm not going to read the entire report to you, or rather 7 reports. What I will do is I will say there are 2 very historical metrics that I have written about on my blog over time, saying that I don't think they apply to the Toronto market anymore. Now, an economist would probably laugh at that and laugh at me, but hear me out. The first one is the debt to income ratio. So as debt to income ratios increase, you would probably say, and this is true of an entire country, right? So what is Canada's debt to income ratio versus America versus another country? What is their debt to income ratio? Is it increasing? And if that is the case, then the real estate market could or should potentially decrease. The reason I don't think that this applies to Toronto anymore is because, number one, and this is going to sound rude, poor people don't buy real estate, right? I actually said that for a fact. But my point is that people that have massive amounts of credit card debt and other debt that counts, oh, and by the way, in case you didn't know, mortgage debt is not part of that ratio, but people that carry this load of debt, they're not going to own real estate. So I've never really believed, and I know this is a stat that's countrywide and it's across the entire economy, I've never really believed that the debt to income ratio, just because of the amount of debt that a portion of society carries, is going to adversely affect the real estate market if these folks aren't going to buy. The second point is because in my lifetime, we have seen worldwide debt amounts that we've never seen before. For example, if you were to Google US debt clock and see, I remember when they were $1 trillion in debt, and that was a lot. What are they now? I probably should have looked it up, probably something like 30 trillion, but there's a debt clock. Canada has a similar website. And if you look at the Canadian government, and I'm not a fan of spending, I'm a fiscal conservative, so call me biased, but this year they're spending $50 billion just on the interest on the debt. So if you ask some economists, they will argue that a country should never have a balanced budget. You should have debt. Just like an economist would argue on a micro level that a business should have debt. Right? You should have assets, you should have liabilities. Assets plus liabilities equals owner's equity, right? We learned that in the first day of grade 10 economics. But a business should have debt. It's called leverage. So I just think that over the last, 10, 20, 30 years, society and the economy and countries have all started to take on more debt, not really try to pay it down. I'm not saying that this is, I am in no way qualified as an economist to say whether or not this is a sustainable long term. But I would say that is part of the reason why the debt to income ratio of Canada has continued to increase and real estate prices have not decreased. The second metric, and this is more important in my opinion, is that we used to chart the growth in real estate prices up against the growth in wage increases. So think of the gap between these two lines on a chart, and I'm a visual thinker, so I can see that there's a gap, and let's say it's in 1978, or let's say it's in 1998 or 2008, how that gap begins to widen, that's a sign that the crash is coming. Except it's not in Toronto, and it's not as far as this generation is concerned. Because the one thing that this ratio doesn't take into consideration is the single greatest transfer of ownership of wealth in the history of mankind, which is baby boomers getting older and giving money to their children. So if you were to say real estate prices are increasing 3 times as fast as wage increases, this is a bad sign. What you're not taking into account is that couple, where one of them makes $90,000 and one of them makes $70,000, who can't afford the house that they want at $1 million, well, their parents give them $300,000 in cash. Now, I know a lot of people don't like to hear that. And in fact, there was a billboard, which I wrote about on my blog, that said, can't afford the home you want, get richer parents. And it was some sort of initiative of, I don't know, probably really angry, down on their luck people. That's my cynical side, talking about those that are bearish. But essentially, there are folks out there that believe it's unfair for parents to give their kids money, or that, the only reason these people can afford houses is because they're being given money by their parents. You know what? Life's not fair. What are you supposed to do with that? But as far as the metric goes, why are increasing prices not going at the same rate at increasing wages? Or if, on the flip side, why are real estate prices increasing 5 times as fast, for argument's sake, or 4 times or 3 times as much as wages, and the market's not cratering? It's because of this transfer of wealth that has happened and will continue to happen. And I can say over the years, I have had so much experience with people's parents giving them money, right up to people in their early 40s, where they're like, yeah, my dad's going to float me the down payment, or he's going to float me the deposit. So if you want to talk about fairness, I should probably talk to the liberals about that. No, seriously, if you want to talk about fairness, that's a conversation for another day. But those are the 2 metrics that I have long looked at and said that they don't really apply to our market anymore. So 2021, right, I wrote this blog, The Gift That Keeps on Giving, the UBS Bubble Index. And in this blog, I outlined all of the times that the Toronto real estate market has been ranked by UBS as being in a bubble. As I said, 2017 number 1, 2018 number 3, 2019 number 2, 2020 number 3, 2021 number 2, and in 2022 they were ranked number 1 again. So let's catch up here. Let's go to 2023, the year 2023. Now, I don't typically pick fights with news outlets. I can be honest and tell you which ones I like, which ones I don't, which ones are left-leaning, which ones are right-leaning. But there's a lot of news outlets about Toronto real estate, about Toronto that talk about real estate. And there's one in particular that I bit my tongue on for a very, very, very long time. And then finally, I just couldn't take it anymore. And the thing about me is that I'm very binary. I'm kind of all or nothing. So I kind of said nothing, and then I basically exploded. And in 2023, I wrote a blog post called Monday Morning Quarterback, the National Enquirer of Real Estate News. Now, for those of you that don't remember the National Enquirer, probably younger than I am, the National Enquirer was one of those supermarket tabloids. And every time I was in a grocery store or a convenience store as a kid, I would look at the front cover and it would be like, Elvis has love child with alien, like just complete nonsense, right? So the idea of the National Enquirer is fake news, not to sound like Trump or anyone else, but I decided to take a shot at BlogTO. I know BlogTO has fans, and that's fine. I respect the publication, but what I couldn't handle anymore were the insane headlines. So in 2023, I took screenshots of their headlines. Nobody wants to buy condos anymore as market completely tanks. Okay, sure. I then wanted to look at the responses to these headlines, because BlogTO for the longest time is writing the most insane headlines. But what about the responses? Now, some journalists will say, don't ever read the comments. And a well-known journalist who shall remain nameless once told me, as it pertains to my blog, don't get in the mud with the people. Don't go and fire comments back. Now, Toronto Realty blog, thank God, has a very astute, intelligent, respectable readership. And everyone that posts on there usually adds value. If you're on BlogTO and you read a headline that says, nobody wants to buy Toronto condos anymore as market completely tanks, you might read a comment that says, I can't wait for the bubble to burst. These people are getting burned, RN. That's right now. They not worth as much as they say. And I wrote on my blog, who are they? Who are they? Who they say, who's they? And sarcastically, I said they in this context is a market of buyers and sellers interacting in a free market. That's what decides price. The next comment says, good, let's watch those prices fall. Okay. The next comment says, oh, thank God, crash harder, please. The next comment says, stop selling studio condos. Start building full family rental apartments. Like, who's this person talking to? And I wrote on the blog, Jacob's Steakhouse should be selling McDonald's. Lexus should focus their efforts on building mopeds, right? The private sector condominium developers should not be building small studio units because they should start building full family rental apartments. This doesn't make any sense. Developers are building what people are buying, and people are buying studio condos. People aren't buying full family apartments because they can't afford them. They can't afford them, well, for many reasons, one of which we explored earlier in the topic, is that 30% of the cost of new construction goes to the government. Yes, but you build what there is demand for. And so this person essentially is saying, start building full family rental apartments. Developers don't just build what you want, and that's not how the free market works. So the next comment says, yet they are sprouting up like grass. Of course, nobody wants to live in a tiny, expensive box. People want affordable homes, as in a house. Shows you how out of touch Doug Ford is. What does Doug Ford have to do with the Blog TO article that talked about condos being built? So again, you might say, David, you're literally looking at the bottom of the barrel. Blog TO commenters. Okay, well, I hope not. But it says people want affordable homes, as in a house. This is wants versus needs. This is grade 12 economics. What's a want versus a need? People want affordable homes, as in a house. This is someone that's saying it's not even good enough to have an affordable condo. I want an affordable house. As I wrote on my blog, I want to drive a Ferrari to work. And I want to have my 22-year-old body back. And I just want to play, I want to bang on the drums all day. These comments are absolutely insane. But this is what people are responding to. And the issue that I had with Blog TO, and I won't even continue to read all these comments because this person says, saw this coming 5 years ago. And I said, the average home price 5 years ago was $590,000. Now it's $751,000. What did this person see coming? Average condo price, that is. So, these comments are just absolutely absurd. But again, the theme here is that these people are all bearish. At the very beginning of this podcast, I said I decided to call this, why do people love to be bearish in Toronto real estate? And I said I didn't want to say, why do people hate Toronto real estate? Because I thought it was negative. These people here hate Toronto real estate, right? This person says, good, let's lower rental prices while we're at it. Like let's, as in who? Who lets who? God? The government? It doesn't make any sense, right? These comments are from people. At current prices, condos are a scam, and a lot of people have been burned as of late. No, they haven't. They made money, right? This person doesn't know what he's talking about, and he hates real estate. All of these people hate real estate. Another comment. Good, yes, finally, the younger generation is starting to understand a command economy. Now wait for the wealthy capitalists to take over. A command economy, like North Korea. This doesn't make any sense, right? Command economy, where centralized government owns businesses and means of production. This comment makes no sense. These people absolutely hate real estate. And if you go and Google, okay, this is the next thing. Let me read to you some of Blog TO's headlines. And this was in the blog I wrote last year where I basically just couldn't take it anymore, okay? And you tell me if my thesis is correct. People love being bearish on Toronto real estate. Toronto's real estate market just took an absolute nosedive. That's a headline. Toronto's real estate market is tanking and experts are pretty worried. Yeah, I'd love to hear from those experts. Rich parents are giving their kids $145,000 or more to get into Toronto's real estate market. You can tell, right, who this publication is targeting. People that hate rich people that hate rich parents, right? The people that commented. Infuriating graphic shows how much Toronto's real estate market has changed in 10 years. Infuriating to who? The city's growing. The economy's growing. The country's growing. Immigration's at an all-time high. Where are these people supposed to live? People moving out of Toronto keep driving up real estate prices in other provinces. Yeah, it's called supply and demand, right? How about this? Nobody wants to buy Toronto condos anymore as market completely tanks. How about this? Experts say the Toronto real estate market is facing a major crisis. How about this? Toronto home prices will keep on sliding, and experts say it will only get worse. Guys, I'm not making this up. If you're listening to this podcast, I'm on my computer right now going through BlogTO headlines. Condos in Toronto are now sitting on the market for shockingly long as sales tank. Toronto home sales are tanking, and experts are very worried. Toronto's housing bubble was just ranked the worst in the world. Right. BlogTO, who is among the most bearish and loves being negative, and to be perfectly honest, hates real estate and caters to people that hate real estate, is quoting the UBS Bubble Index. So I said at the onset of this podcast today that I wanted to answer the question, why do people love being bearish on Toronto real estate? And suddenly I'm reminded of Winona Ryder in the movie Reality Bites. The very end of her speech as the valedictorian, she loses her notes and then says, the answer is, I don't know. Now I'm hoping for a similar response because in the movie, even though she screwed up her speech, everyone starts clapping because they think it's some sort of amazing metaphorical ending. The answer is, I don't know. Why do people love to be bearish on Toronto real estate? I have theories, I have ideas, but I don't actually know. My ideas, they're not that positive. My theories are kind of depressing. And sadly, I believe that it's just human nature. Everybody wants. And I said that when I was looking at some of the comments on the BlogTO article, right? Everybody wants. Now, if you want something so badly, maybe you're going to align yourself with ideas or with people who might be able to lead you there. And so if you in 2008 really wanted a house and you couldn't afford it, but you had a guy like Garth Turner writing books and writing a blog about the impending crash, you might naturally gravitate towards that person. Now, for BlogTO, I mean, look, it's their readership. They cater to broke Gen Z and millennials that just love crapping on things that other people have. I'm sorry. That's kind of what I think. And based on the comments and based on their headlines, I don't think I'm wrong, but that's our readership. I don't blame them. It's a business. They're trying to make money. So they write negative real estate headlines and they try to attract people that hate real estate, right? So for the UBS Bubble Index, sure. I think they look at Toronto and they say, how is this happening? I think they look at statistics like the ones I mentioned and all kinds of other statistics that lead them to believe like, hey, this can't be sustainable. I know some folks I've had in the United States that come up here to buy a house and they feel uncomfortable, making less than a 75% down payment on their home. And they go, God, you Canadians and your debt. Maybe they're right. Maybe we've just become so accustomed to the 20% down payment that we think nothing of it. So do I know why people love to be bearish on Toronto real estate? I think folks like Garth Turner and Nicole Foss and Hilliard MacBeth, they work in financial services, they're writing books, they're selling competing products. Whether or not they actually believed it or they're just trying to write books and sell them, I don't know, right? Just like I don't know why people love to be bearish on Toronto real estate. But I have theories. And as I said, I wish they were better. I wish it didn't just stem from envy and jealousy. But not everyone can own a red brick Georgian Tudor home in Rosedale. And if somebody really believes in their heart that the market's going to crash 90% so they can buy a $3 million house for $300,000, I mean, they've just gotten rid of all logic and ration and reason. So I don't have the answer to this question. If you do, I'd love to hear from you. I do like hearing from readers on Toronto Realty Blog. I've had a few people email me after listening to podcasts. And if you have an idea of why people love to be bearish on Toronto real estate, email me at davidfleming@ballsyrealestate.com. If you're watching on YouTube, feel free to post in the comments section below. Agree or disagree with any of these points. Love to hear from you as well. That's what's made Toronto Realty Blog so fun over the years for me. And that, to me, is part of the reason why I wanted to do this podcast as well, right? There's two sides to every story. Although on this one, I don't think we could argue that people don't love being bearish onto relevant real estate. So guys, thank you so much for listening wherever you get your podcast. Please remember to like, comment, or subscribe. If you're watching on YouTube as well, give a thumbs up or whatever the heck it is. A comment would be fantastic. Any ideas for future podcasts? I am all ears. Thank you once again. Have a great day.